Welcome to Forgotten Hours. Tonight, let us wander together through the gardens of Shiraz, where the whispers of Hafez still drift among the roses, the nightingales, and the candlelight. Breathe deeply, let the world grow quiet, and allow this timeless story to guide you gently into rest and dreams. Chapter 1: Gardens of Dawn. The morning mist rises slowly from the gardens of Shiraz, and you find yourself walking along paths worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims, poets, and lovers. Your bare feet touch cool stones still damp with dew, and you breathe deeply, slowly, letting the perfumed air fill your lungs with the essence of jasmine and damask roses. You walk, and you listen, and you feel the gentle stirring of something ancient in the air around you. The dawn light filters through the cypress trees like liquid silver, casting long shadows that dance and sway with each whisper of the morning breeze. You move forward slowly, unhurried, as if time itself has slowed to match your footsteps. The garden stretches before you in terraced beauty, each level a symphony of color and fragrance that seems to sing in harmony with your heartbeat. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply, you drift farther into this world of eternal spring. Here in these gardens where the great Hafez once walked, you sense his presence like a gentle warmth against your skin. The roses seem to lean toward you as you pass, their petals soft as silk, their perfume a prayer offered to the morning sky. Orange blossoms hang heavy on ancient trees, their white flowers glowing like stars against the dark green leaves, and you reach out to touch one, feeling its velvet softness beneath your fingertips. The sound of water draws you deeper into the garden's embrace. A fountain plays at the center of a marble courtyard, its gentle splash creating ripples that catch the early light and scatter it like diamonds across the surface. You sit beside this fountain, feeling the cool mist touch your face, and you close your eyes to listen more deeply to the music it makes. Water falling, drops ascending, circles expanding endlessly outward. In this moment of perfect stillness, you begin to understand why Hafez found such inspiration in these gardens. Every element speaks of divine beauty, the symmetry of the paths, the careful placement of each rosebush, the way the morning light transforms ordinary stone into something luminous and sacred. You feel your breathing slow, your heartbeat steady, your mind settle into the rhythm of this timeless place. A nightingale begins to sing from somewhere in the rose bower, its voice pure and haunting as it rises and falls like a prayer set to music. You listen, and you feel the poet's spirit stirring in response to this ancient song. For Hafez knew that the nightingale was the voice of the soul in love, crying out its longing to be united with the beloved rose. In Persian poetry, this love was both earthly and divine, the same passion that drives a lover to his beloved also draws the mystic toward God. You walk, and you listen, and you feel yourself becoming part of this eternal dialogue between the nightingale and the rose. The garden path leads you past beds of white jasmine that release their intoxicating fragrance with each touch of the morning breeze. You move slowly, letting your senses absorb every nuance, the way the light shifts as clouds pass overhead, the distant sound of other fountains playing deeper in the garden, the rustle of silk as your robes brush against the flowering bushes. In the shade of an ancient mulberry tree, you discover a marble bench worn smooth by countless visitors. You sit here, feeling the cool stone through your clothing, and you let your gaze wander across the garden's careful geometry. Everything here speaks of paradise, not the paradise of the afterlife, but the paradise that exists in moments of perfect beauty, perfect peace, perfect connection to the divine mystery that flows through all things. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into contemplation. As you sit in this sacred space, you begin to sense the presence of Hafez himself, not as a ghost or apparition, but as a consciousness that has become one with the garden he loved so deeply. He is in the perfume of the roses, in the song of the nightingale, in the gentle splash of the fountain. His spirit has merged with the beauty that inspired his greatest verses, and now that beauty whispers to you as it once whispered to him. You close your eyes and let yourself sink deeper into this communion with the past. The morning grows warmer, but the garden remains cool and refreshing, as if it exists in its own perfect climate. The scents around you seem to intensify. Rose and jasmine, orange blossom and cypress, the green smell of growing things, and the clean scent of flowing water. In this heightened state of awareness, you begin to hear something beyond the physical sounds of the garden. It is as if the very air carries the echo of verses once spoken here, words of such beauty and truth that they have become part of the garden's essence. You do not hear them as sounds, but rather as feelings that rise within you, sensations of longing and fulfillment, of earthly desire transformed into spiritual aspiration. The sun climbs higher, and shafts of golden light begin to penetrate the leafy canopies above you. Where the light touches the fountain's spray, tiny rainbows appear and disappear like fleeting glimpses of divine glory. You watch this play of light and water, feeling your mind become as fluid and changeable as the patterns dancing before your eyes. You walk, and you listen, and you feel the boundaries between yourself and the garden beginning to dissolve. Finally, your destiny is tied into peace. A butterfly alights on the back of your hand, its wings a riot of blue and gold that seems to capture all the colors of the morning sky. It rests there for a long moment, and you feel its tiny weight as a blessing, a sign that you have been accepted into the garden's living community. When it finally flutters away, you follow its meandering flight deeper into the maze of pathways and flowering alcoves. Each turn in the path reveals new wonders, a reflecting pool where koi swim in lazy circles, their orange and white forms moving like living calligraphy beneath the surface. A bower where climbing roses have created a natural cathedral, their arched branches forming a ceiling of leaves and flowers, through which the filtered light falls like benediction. A small shrine where someone has left offerings of rose petals and burning incense, the sweet smoke rising straight up in the still air. You pause at each of these places, feeling the accumulated devotion of centuries, the prayers and poems and moments of inspiration that have been offered here. The garden is not just a collection of beautiful plants and flowing water. It is a repository of human longing, a place where the soul comes to remember its true nature and purpose. As you continue your slow exploration, you discover that you are not alone. Other figures move quietly through the garden, some in the simple robes of dervishes, others in the elegant dress of scholars and poets. They nod to you as they pass, their faces serene with the peace that comes from long communion with beauty and truth. You realize that this garden exists outside of normal time, that all who have ever sought inspiration here continue to walk its paths in some eternal present moment. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into this timeless realm. The path leads you to the heart of the garden, where the largest fountain plays in the center of a circular courtyard paved with intricate mosaics. The patterns beneath your feet tell stories, geometric designs that speak of the underlying order of creation, stylized flowers and vines that celebrate the abundance of divine creativity, calligraphy that transforms sacred words into visual beauty. You sit on the fountain's marble rim and trail your fingers in the cool water, watching the ripples spread outward in perfect circles. In these expanding rings, you see a metaphor for the way inspiration moves through the world, beginning as a single moment of insight in one human consciousness, then spreading outward to touch other minds and hearts across the centuries. The morning air carries the distant sound of a flute, its melody so beautiful that it seems to make the very flowers bloom more brilliantly. You turn your head to listen more closely, and you realize that the music is not coming from any earthly instrument, but rather from the garden itself, as if all the accumulated beauty and devotion of this place has found voice in this haunting melody. You close your eyes and let the music wash over you, feeling it resonate in your bones, in your blood, in the very rhythm of your breathing. This is how inspiration comes, you understand, not as a thunderbolt from heaven, but as a gradual awakening of the heart to the divine beauty that surrounds us always, waiting only for us to develop eyes to see and ears to hear. The sun continues its slow climb, and the garden begins to shimmer with heat haze, as if it might dissolve at any moment into pure light and fragrance. But you know that this dissolution would not be an ending, but a transformation, a return to the source from which all beauty springs. You feel your own boundaries softening, your sense of separateness melting away like morning mist before the rising sun. You walk and you listen, and you feel yourself becoming one with the eternal spring of inspiration. Birds begin to gather around the fountain, not just nightingales now, but doves and finches, sparrows and brilliant blue jays. They drink from the fountain's overflow and splash in the shallow pools formed by the scattered spray. Their voices create a chorus that seems to celebrate your presence, welcoming you into their morning song. As you watch these creatures of the air, you remember that in Persian poetry, birds are often symbols of the soul in its various states of spiritual development. The nightingale represents the soul in love, crying out its longing. The dove symbolizes peace and divine grace. The falcon embodies the soul's nobility when it returns to its true master. Each bird that gathers here brings its own gift of meaning to the garden's living scripture. You reach out slowly, and a small finch lands on your outstretched finger, its tiny claws gripping gently as it looks at you with bright, intelligent eyes. In that moment of perfect trust between human and bird, you feel a door opening in your heart, a recognition that all of creation participates in the same divine love that inspired Hafez to write his immortal verses. The fountain's spray catches the light and throws tiny rainbows across your face, and you taste the sweetness of pure water on your lips. Everything here speaks of abundance, not the material abundance that the world pursues, but the spiritual abundance that flows from recognition of our true relationship to the divine source of all beauty. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into union with the garden's timeless wisdom. A peacock emerges from behind a screen of jasmine vines, its tail fanned in full display, each eye spot seeming to watch you with benevolent awareness. The bird moves with stately grace across the mosaic courtyard, and you follow its progress with wondering eyes. In the Islamic tradition, the peacock is sometimes said to be the bird of paradise, and seeing one here feels like a confirmation that you have indeed entered a realm where earthly and heavenly beauty merge into one seamless whole. The morning advances, but time seems to have lost all urgency here in the garden. You move from place to place without haste, allowing each location to work its particular magic on your consciousness. In one secluded alcove, you find an ancient sundial whose bronze gnomon casts its shadow across numerals, worn smooth by centuries of weather. But the shadow seems to move with impossible slowness, as if even time itself bows to the garden's peaceful rhythm. You sit in the shade of a pomegranate tree heavy with ruby fruit, and you remember that in Persian symbolism, the pomegranate represents the unity that contains infinite diversity, each seed a separate entity, yet all held within the same sweet wholeness. Your own consciousness begins to feel like this, containing multitudes, yet unified by the single thread of awareness that runs through all experience. The garden's paths seem to multiply as you explore, leading you through ever more wonderful discoveries. A grove where citrus trees fill the air with the sharp sweetness of their blossoms. A reflecting pool so still that the cypress trees mirrored in its depths seem more real than their actual counterparts. A hillside planted with lavender that releases its calming fragrance with each footstep. In each of these places, you pause to absorb the particular quality of beauty and peace that makes it special. You are learning the garden's grammar, beginning to read the language of inspiration that Hafez mastered so completely. Beauty speaks to those who know how to listen, not with words, but with direct transmission of truth from heart to heart. You walk and you listen, and you feel your capacity for wonder expanding with each breath, one by one. As the morning reaches its zenith, you find yourself back at the central fountain, but now you see it with new eyes. The patterns in the mosaic pavement seem to pulse with living energy. The spray from the fountain creates momentary sculptures of crystal and light that form and dissolve like thoughts arising in consciousness. The sound of falling water has become a mantra that synchronizes perfectly with your heartbeat and breathing. You understand now why Hafez found such inexhaustible inspiration in these gardens. They are not merely beautiful. They are a complete universe in miniature, containing all the patterns and principles that govern both earthly and spiritual life. Every element here is a teacher, every moment a lesson in the art of seeing with the eyes of the heart. The sun stands directly overhead, and the garden shimmers with heat and light that seems to come not just from above, but from within each leaf and flower. You close your eyes and feel this inner light responding to the outer illumination, creating a circulation of radiance that connects you to everything around you. In this moment of perfect noon, you realize that the garden exists not just in 14th century Shiraz, but wherever a human heart opens to receive the gift of divine beauty. It is the eternal garden that all mystics and poets tarry within themselves, the source from which all true inspiration springs. Hafez did not simply visit this garden, he became it, transforming his very being into a place where others could come to drink from the fountain of wisdom. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into the realization that you too are part of this eternal garden. The morning chapter of your journey draws to a close, but you know that what you had experienced here will remain with you always. The garden's peace has entered your blood. Its beauty has awakened capacities in your heart that you never knew existed. You rise slowly from beside the fountain, feeling the reluctance of someone who must leave paradise, but knows that paradise, once truly seen, can never really be lost. As you prepare to continue your journey through the world of Hafez's inspiration, you take one last look around the garden in its full morning glory. The roses seem to nod farewell, the fountain continues its eternal song, and the cypress trees stand as silent witnesses to the renewal that has taken place within your soul. You walk toward the garden's gate, but with each step you feel more certain that you are not leaving this place behind. Instead, you are carrying it with you, adding your own small offering to the vast treasury of human experience that the garden represents. Like Hafez himself, you have learned to see the divine beauty that hides within the ordinary world, waiting always to be discovered by those who approach with open hearts and patient eyes. The morning mist has burned away completely now, and the full heat of the Persian day begins to assert itself. but you carry with you the memory of cool water and fragrant shade, the blessing of beauty freely given and gratefully received. In your heart, it will always be dawn in the garden of inspiration, always the perfect moment when earth and heaven touch in recognition of their shared source. You walk and you listen, and you carry the garden's eternal spring within you as you move toward the next chapter of your journey through the mystical world of Hafez. As the soft breeze whispers through the ancient cypresses, you feel a gentle calm enveloping you. Each step you take echoes softly, blending with the distant murmur of a fountain's water, its melody harmonizing with your heartbeat. In the distance, you see a Persian garden, lush and serene, with its symmetrical paths and vibrant flowers. The scent of jasmine and rose fills the air, calming your spirit. You find a quiet corner where you sit and reflect on the beauty of the moment. The light of a flickering candle dances gently, casting soft shadows on the walls. Here in this tranquil space, you feel a deep connection to the wisdom of Sufi thought, of love, unity, and the divine within all things. As you drift into a peaceful sleep, you know you are always cradled by this timeless, serene beauty. Chapter 2: Whispers of the Tavern. The heat of midday draws you from the garden's cool embrace toward the older quarters of Shiraz, where narrow streets wind between ancient buildings, like streams seeking their way to the sea. You walk slowly through shadows that provide blessed relief from the Persian sun, your footsteps echoing softly against stone walls that have witnessed 8 centuries of pilgrims, merchants, and seekers of truth. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You feel the city's ancient rhythms calling to you. The street opens suddenly into a small square where a fountain plays beneath the spreading branches of an enormous plane tree. The sound of water mingles with distant voices, the clip-clop of donkey hooves on cobblestones, the musical call of a vendor selling pomegranates from his cart. But beneath these everyday sounds, you sense something else, a deeper current of mystery that draws you like a river draws the thirsty traveler. You follow this invisible thread through increasingly narrow alleys, past workshops where craftsmen bend over their ancient arts, a calligraphy whose brush moves like a dancer across cream-colored paper, a carpet weaver whose fingers work magic with threads of silk and gold, a metalworker whose hammer rings against silver with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Each sound adds to the symphony of the old city, and you feel yourself becoming part of this living music. Your breathing slows to match the unhurried pace of these artisans. Your heartbeat synchronizes with the rhythm of their tools. Your footsteps find their own place in the percussion of urban life. You walk and you listen and you feel the city embracing you like an old friend. The alley takes a final turn and opens into a courtyard you had not expected to find. High walls provide privacy and shade, while overhead, grapevines heavy with fruit create a natural ceiling that filters the light into patterns of gold and green. At the center of this hidden space stands a simple building with arched doorways and windows, its walls the color of rose petals dried by desert sun. This is the tavern, not the public house of common imagination, but a sanctuary where those who seek to taste the wine of divine love gather to share their thirst and their discoveries. You approach slowly, feeling the weight of centuries settling around your shoulders like a familiar cloak. The doorway is curtained with fabric the color of wine itself, and as you push through this threshold, you enter a realm where the ordinary rules of time and space seem to bend to accommodate deeper truths. The interior is dimly lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on walls, lined with alcoves and cushioned seats. The air is thick with the mingled fragrances of rose water, burning sandalwood, and something else. A scent that speaks of fermentation and transformation, of grapes surrendering their essence to become something far more potent and mysterious. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into this sanctuary of seekers. The tavern keeper approaches, an elderly man whose eyes hold depths of understanding that speak of lifetimes spent in service to truth. Without words, he leads you to a cushioned alcove where you can sit comfortably and observe the gentle theater of this sacred space. He brings you a cup, not of wine in the earthly sense, but of something that tastes like liquid starlight, like the essence of all the roses that ever bloomed, like the distilled experience of every moment of perfect beauty you have ever witnessed. As you sip this mysterious draught, you begin to understand why Hafez so often wrote of wine and taverns in his ghazals. The wine here is not the enemy of sobriety, but its ultimate fulfillment, a consciousness so expanded and refined that ordinary awareness seems like sleeping by comparison. The tavern is not a place of escape from reality, but of deeper engagement with the reality that lies beneath appearances. Other figures occupy the alcoves around you, some alone, some in quiet conversation, all united by an invisible bond of seeking. Their faces reflect the lamplight with an inner radiance that suggests they too have tasted the wine of divine love and found their understanding transformed by its influence. You walk and you listen and you feel yourself becoming part of this brotherhood of the awakened heart. A musician sits in one corner, his lute creating melodies that seem to emerge from the very air rather than from the vibration of strings. The music has no beginning or end, but flows like a river of sound that carries the consciousness of all who hear it toward states of ever greater beauty and peace. You close your eyes and let this music penetrate your being, feeling it dissolve the last barriers between your individual awareness and the universal consciousness that pervades all things. In this state of musical meditation, you begin to sense the presence of Hafez himself, not as a historical figure from the 14th century, but as a living principle of inspiration that continues to move through all who open their hearts to receive it. He is the wine that transforms ordinary consciousness into mystical awareness. He is the tavern keeper who serves this wine with infinite compassion to all who truly thirst for it. The lamplight flickers and dances, creating patterns on the walls that seem to form themselves into verses of poetry, words of such beauty and truth that they bypass the mind entirely and speak directly to the soul. You do not need to read these verses to understand them. Their meaning flows into you like wine absorbed by thirsty earth. Come, whispers the voice of the eternal tavern keeper. Drink deeply from the cup of love, and let your small self dissolve into the ocean of divine awareness. Here, in this place of sacred intoxication, all separation ends and all longing finds its true object. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into the wine-dark mystery of divine love. The evening advances, though in this timeless space, the passage of hours matters little. The lamps are trimmed and refilled, their light growing steadier and warmer as darkness gathers in the courtyard beyond. More seekers arrive, their faces bearing the marks of long journeying, not through geographical space, but through the landscapes of the soul. A woman enters whose beauty seems to radiate from within, transforming her ordinary features into something luminous and sacred. She moves with the grace of one who has learned to dance with destiny, rather than struggle against it. In her presence, you understand why Hafez wrote so often of the beloved, not referring to any earthly object of desire, but to that divine beauty which manifests through all beautiful forms while transcending them all. She takes her place in an alcove across from yours, and when her eyes meet yours, across the lamplit space, you feel a shock of recognition. This is not personal attraction, but something far more profound, the recognition of one aspect of the divine by another, the joy of unity glimpsing itself in the mirror of apparent multiplicity. You walk, and you listen, and you feel the boundaries of individual selfhood dissolving in the wine of universal love. The musician's lute gives way to the sound of a reed flute, its haunting voice rising and falling like the breath of the universe itself. In Sufi tradition, the reed flute represents the human soul crying out its longing to return to the divine source from which it was separated, like a reed cut from the river bank and fashioned into an instrument of music. As the flute's melody fills the tavern, you feel your own soul crying out in recognition of this ancient longing. The wine you have been drinking reveals its true nature. It is the wine of remembrance, helping the soul recall its true origin and destiny. In this state of sacred intoxication, all the veils that normally separate the consciousness from its source become transparent, and you begin to see with the eyes of the heart rather than the eyes of the head. A dervish enters, his simple robe worn white by long travels on dusty roads. His face bears the serenity of one who has learned to find the eternal pilgrimage site within his own heart. He nods to the assembled company with the courtesy of one saint greeting others, then settles into an empty alcove where he closes his eyes and begins the silent vikr, the remembrance of God that is the dervish's constant practice. In the presence of this holy man, The very air in the tavern seems to thicken with blessing. You feel your breathing naturally synchronize with his, your heartbeat finding its rhythm in the pulse of his silent prayer. This is the wine that Hafez truly celebrated, not the product of earthly vineyards, but the intoxication that comes from complete surrender to the divine will. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into the ocean of divine remembrance. The evening deepens, and the tavern reveals more of its secrets. In one alcove, a group of scholars discuss the hidden meanings of the Quran, their voices low and respectful as they explore the infinite depths of sacred text. Their conversation is itself a form of worship, each insight a pearl drawn from the ocean of divine knowledge. In another corner, two lovers sit in silent communion, their earthly affection serving as a doorway to the cosmic love that moves the stars and atoms with equal care. Their presence reminds you that Hafez saw no contradiction between human and divine love. The same force that draws lover to beloved also draws the soul to its source. The wine circulates freely, but you notice that no one becomes intoxicated in the ordinary sense. Instead, the drink seems to clarify consciousness, stripping away illusion and revealing the luminous reality that underlies all appearances. This is the wine of gnosis, the drink of those who have tasted truth and can never again be satisfied with mere opinion or belief. A young poet enters, his eyes bright with the fire of new inspiration. He carries a notebook filled with fresh verses, each one a attempt to capture in words the wordless mystery he has glimpsed in moments of divine revelation. The other patrons welcome him with the warmth reserved for one who serves the same master they all serve, the spirit of truth and beauty that speaks through all authentic poetry. You walk and you listen, and you feel yourself joining this eternal congregation of seekers. The poet begins to recite one of his ghazals, his voice carrying the melody that is inseparable from Persian verse. As his words fill the tavern, you realize that you are witnessing the same process that once occurred when Hafez himself sat in such a place, allowing divine inspiration to flow through him and into forms that would carry its essence down through the centuries. Each couplet is a wine cup offered to the consciousness, inviting you to drink deeply from the well of eternal beauty. Each metaphor a doorway into deeper understanding. The poet speaks of roses and nightingales, of wine and beloved ones. But beneath these earthly images flows the wine of mystical truth that intoxicates the soul with recognition of its own divine nature. The assembled company listens in perfect silence, each person receiving the poetry according to their own capacity for understanding. For some, the verses are beautiful entertainment. For others, they are keys that unlock doors in consciousness that have been sealed for lifetimes. But all are nourished by the love that flows through the poet's words like wine through a crystal vessel. As the recitation ends, a profound silence fills the tavern. not an empty silence, but one pregnant with meaning, heavy with the presence of truth that has been invoked by the power of authentic verse. In this silence, you feel the presence of all the great poets who have ever lived, their spirits gathered like invisible witnesses to testify to the eternal nature of divine inspiration. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into the silence where all words are born. The night advances, and the tavern settles into a rhythm of quiet contemplation. Conversations continue in whispered tones. The lute plays softly in the background, and the lamps burn with steady flame that seems to mirror the inner light kindled in each heart by contact with truth. You find yourself in conversation with the beautiful woman whose presence so touched you earlier. But your words seem to come from somewhere beyond your ordinary mind, as if the wine has dissolved the barriers between souls and allowed direct heart-to-heart communication. She speaks of her journeys through the landscapes of love, and you understand that she is describing the same territory you have been exploring, though by different paths. The beloved, she says, her voice soft as rose petals falling on still water, is both the most distant and the most intimate reality. We search for union across the entire cosmos, only to discover that separation was always an illusion. The wine of love reveals this truth by dissolving the boundaries that seemed to keep us apart. You nod in perfect understanding, feeling a serene calmness envelop you, like the gentle embrace of a Persian garden, where the air is filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the whisper of ancient wisdom, knowing that her words arise from the same source that inspired Hafez to write his most profound verses about the nature of divine love. In the tavern's sacred intoxication, all seekers become mouthpieces for the same ultimate wisdom. The dervish in the corner has begun a soft recitation of the 99 beautiful names of God, each name a facet of the single jewel of divine reality. His voice weaves through the tavern like incense smoke, touching each consciousness with its particular fragrance of holiness. You feel yourself drawn into this litany, your own heart silently repeating the names as they flower in the garden of awareness. You walk and you listen, and you feel yourself dissolving into the ocean of divine names and qualities. A merchant enters, his robes dusty from long travel, his eyes bright with the stories of distant lands. But as he settles into the tavern's embrace and accepts the wine that is offered to him, his tales of earthly adventures transform into parables of spiritual seeking. Every city he has visited becomes a station on the path to God. Every bargain he has struck a lesson in the economy of divine love. This is the alchemy that occurs in the true tavern. All worldly experience is transmuted into spiritual gold. All earthly wine becomes the wine of divine love. All human conversation becomes a dialogue between aspects of the one divine consciousness that plays at being many. The night deepens toward its darkest hour, and the tavern reveals its ultimate secret. In the deepest silence between conversations, in the pause between the musician's phrases. In the space between heartbeats, you glimpse the source from which all wine and all poetry spring. It is not a place or a thing, but a quality of consciousness, the awareness that recognizes its own divine nature and celebrates that recognition with the wine of cosmic joy. Hafez sits in every alcove, his spirit moving through every conversation, his wisdom flowing through every cup of wine. He has become what every true poet ultimately becomes, not a person, but a principle of divine revelation that continues to manifest wherever hearts open to receive the gift of inspired verse. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into the realization that you too are a vessel for this eternal inspiration. As the night reaches its deepest point, the tavern keeper approaches your alcove once more. His ancient face creases in a smile that seems to contain all the wisdom of all the sages who have ever lived. Without words, he refills your cup with the wine that is never exhausted, the wine that increases with sharing, the wine that transforms all who taste it into instruments of divine love. Drink, his silence seems to say, and remember who you truly are beneath all the veils of separation and forgetfulness. Let this wine wash away everything that is not eternal in your nature, everything that keeps you from recognizing your own divine essence. You lift the cup to your lips and drink deeply, feeling the liquid fire spread through your being, like sunrise spreading across the landscape of the soul in this moment. You understand viscerally what Hafez meant when he wrote of wine and intoxication. Not the mere fermentation of grapes, but the fermentation of consciousness itself, the transformation of ordinary awareness into the wine of divine love that intoxicates the soul with truth. The other patrons of the tavern seem to shimmer in the lamplight, their forms becoming translucent, revealing the divine light that animates all beings. You realize that you are looking at the eternal tavern where all seekers of truth gather, regardless of their historical epoch or geographical location. This is the tavern of the heart, the sanctuary of the soul, the place where all who thirst for divine love come to drink from the inexhaustible fountain. You walk and you listen, and you feel yourself becoming one with this eternal gathering of souls. The hours pass without your awareness, for time has ceased to have meaning in this place, where eternity touches the temporal world. You speak with poets and mystics, merchants and scholars, lovers and wanderers, each conversation a thread in the vast tapestry of human seeking that Hafez so beautifully depicted in his verses. As the first hint of dawn begins to lighten the sky beyond the courtyard, you realize that your night in the tavern is drawing to a close. But you understand now that this ending is also a beginning. You are not leaving this place behind, but carrying its essence with you as you continue your journey through the world of Hafez's inspiration. The wine you have drunk will never leave your system entirely. It has become part of your spiritual metabolism, transforming how you perceive and interact with all of reality. The conversations you have shared will echo in your consciousness like prayers, reminding you always of the brotherhood of seekers that transcends all boundaries of time and space. As you rise to leave, each of your companions in the tavern nods farewell, not goodbye, but recognition that your paths will cross again in that eternal realm where all sincere seekers ultimately converge. The beautiful woman's eyes hold a promise that the love you have glimpsed together will continue to unfold across all the landscapes of existence. The dervish's blessing flows toward you like silent fragrance, carrying the peace that comes from complete surrender to divine will. You walk toward the doorway where the wine-colored curtain stirs in the morning breeze, but with each step you feel more certain that the tavern you are leaving behind externally has taken up permanent residence within your heart. Like Hafez himself, you have learned to find the divine wine in every cup of earthly experience, to discover the eternal tavern wherever souls gather in recognition of their shared thirst for truth. Chapter 3, Starry Nights of Shiraz. The wine of the tavern still flows warm in your veins as you emerge into the pre-dawn streets of Shiraz, where the last stars fade slowly before the approaching sun. But something in your heart calls you to return when darkness falls again, to seek the inspiration that comes only under the vast dome of night sky that has watched over this ancient city for millennia uncounted. You walk through the day in a state of quiet anticipation, feeling the pull of evening like the tide feels the moon's distant influence. The wine you drank in the sacred tavern has opened inner senses that perceive the subtle currents flowing between earth and heaven. And you know that when the stars emerge, they will speak to you in a language you are finally prepared to understand. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You feel the cosmos turning toward its nightly revelation. As twilight approaches, you make your way to the hills above Shiraz, where the city's lights cannot dim the ancient conversation between human consciousness and the celestial sphere. The path winds upward through terraced gardens and groves of cypress, each step taking you closer to that threshold where earth meets sky in perfect communion. The air grows cooler as you climb, carrying scents of wild jasmine and mountain herbs that seem to prepare your senses for the subtler fragrances of starlight and cosmic wind. Your footsteps find their own rhythm on the worn stones, matching the pulse of some vast heartbeat that encompasses both your individual life and the life of the universe itself. At the summit of the hill, you discover a small pavilion built of white marble that glows with accumulated moonbeams from countless nights of solitary vigil. This is where Hafez came to read the Book of Heaven, to study the celestial poetry written in light across the darkness of infinite space. The pavilion sits like a prayer offered to the sky, its arched openings framing views of the horizon where earth curves away into mystery. You walk and you listen, and you feel yourself entering the observatory of the soul. As the last light fades in the west, the first stars begin to appear with the shy hesitancy of lovers approaching their beloved. Venus hangs like a jewel above the darkening mountains, and you remember that in Persian poetry, this planet is called the guardian of love, watching over all who seek union with the divine. Her light seems to pulse with conscious awareness, as if acknowledging your presence and blessing your nocturnal pilgrimage. You settle onto the soft cushions that someone has placed in the pavilion. Perhaps they have been there for centuries, renewed by countless seekers who had shared your longing to commune with the stellar wisdom. The marble beneath you still holds warmth from the day's sun, creating a perfect balance between earthly comfort and celestial aspiration. The darkness deepens, and with it comes the gradual revelation of the night's full glory. Star after star emerges from the velvet depths of space, each one a word in the cosmic scripture that Hafez learned to read with the eyes of the heart. The constellation of the Swan spreads its wings across the Milky Way's luminous river, while Cassiopeia sits enthroned in the northern sky like a queen of infinite patience. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into the stellar meditation. As your eyes adjust to the darkness, the sky reveals layers upon layers of celestial beauty. The brightest stars seem to pulse with their own inner fire, while the fainter ones create a gossamer web of light that suggests the subtle connections linking all things in existence. Between the visible stars, you sense a timeless dance, a cosmic lullaby that whispers of ancient gardens and peaceful rituals. You feel the gentle embrace of history, as if each star is a guardian of wisdom, watching over you, guiding you. On this tranquil journey, you begin to perceive deeper spaces that are not empty voids, but pregnant darknesses where new stars wait to be born. In this expanding awareness, you understand why Hafez so often wrote of fate and destiny, of the mysterious forces that guide human life according to patterns written in the stars. But this is not the crude astrology of prediction and fortune-telling. It is the recognition that human consciousness participates in the same cosmic intelligence that moves the celestial bodies in their eternal dance. A shooting star streaks across the zenith, its brief brilliance seeming to carry a message from the depths of space directly to your heart. In that moment of celestial fire, you feel a transmission of inspiration that bypasses all intellectual understanding and speaks directly to the poet within you. This is how divine revelation comes to those who have learned to read the language of light, not as information to be analyzed, but as direct experience of cosmic consciousness awakening to itself. A Milky Way emerges in its full splendor as your night vision deepens, that luminous river flowing from horizon to horizon like the visible manifestation of the divine energy that sustains all worlds. Ancient Persian astronomers called it the path of straw, the road by which the souls of the righteous travel to their eternal home. Tonight, gazing up at its gossamer radiance, you feel your own soul stirring with recognition of its celestial origins. You walk and you listen, and you feel yourself becoming part of the cosmic conversation. The night air carries sounds that daylight drowns in its busy clamor, the distant call of a night bird, the whisper of wind through cypress branches, the almost inaudible music that some say emerges from the rotation of the celestial spheres themselves. You close your eyes and listen more deeply, feeling these subtle sounds weaving together into a symphony that encompasses both the earthly and heavenly realms. When you open your eyes again, the stars seem brighter, as if your act of deep listening has opened channels of perception that allow more of their light to enter your awareness. Each constellation tells its story: Perseus the hero, Andromeda the princess, Cygnus the swan that carries souls between earth and heaven. But beneath these mythological narratives, you begin to perceive deeper meanings that relate to the architecture of consciousness itself. The Great Bear wheels around the pole star with massive dignity, marking the hours of night with celestial precision. In this eternal rotation, you see a symbol of the spiritual path, the soul's journey around the axis of divine truth, sometimes approaching closer to the center, sometimes swept to the periphery, but always held in the orbit of divine love that prevents it from flying off into the chaos of complete separation. Jupiter hangs in the constellation of the Scales, its steady light embodying the principle of cosmic justice that ensures every action receives its appropriate response across the vast scales of space and time. Mars glows red in the region of the Scorpion, reminding you that even the most challenging experiences serve the soul's ultimate evolution toward divine consciousness. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into the stellar wisdom that flows through the night air. A cloud drifts across the face of the moon, creating patterns of shadow and silver light that seem to form themselves into Arabic calligraphy, verses from the Quran written across the sky in luminous script. You cannot read the specific words, but their meaning flows into you directly, speaking of divine mercy that encompasses all worlds, of a cosmic compassion that guides every atom and every galaxy toward their ultimate fulfillment. In this moment of celestial reading, you understand how Hafez could find no contradiction between his devotion to sacred scripture and his celebration of earthly love and beauty. The same divine consciousness that revealed itself through the prophet's words also reveals itself through the movement of stars and planets, through the opening of a rose and the song of a nightingale, through every authentic expression of love between human souls. The night deepens, and with it comes a quality of silence that seems to originate not in the absence of sound, but in the presence of something so vast and profound that ordinary noise appears as mere surface turbulence on an ocean of infinite depth. In this cosmic silence, you begin to hear the subtle music that Hafez described in his verses, the harmony of the spheres that emerges when consciousness expands to encompass the entire universe. A family of owls calls from the cypress grove below the pavilion, their voices adding their own notes to the night's symphony. In Persian tradition, the owl is sometimes seen as a symbol of spiritual wisdom that emerges only in darkness, the insight that comes when the bright distractions of daytime consciousness are set aside and the soul turns inward toward its own luminous depths. You walk and you listen, and you feel the boundary between inner and outer space dissolving. The star maps that Hafez studied were not mere astronomical diagrams, but blueprints of consciousness itself, showing how the light of divine awareness streams through different celestial channels to create the infinite variety of human experience. Tonight, gazing up at the same stars that inspired his greatest verses, you begin to read your own spiritual destiny written in patterns of light across the cosmic dome. The constellation of the Lyre hangs overhead, its brightest star Vega pulsing with the rhythm of cosmic music. In this stellar instrument, you see a symbol of the human soul when it becomes perfectly attuned to divine will, no longer generating its own discordant notes, but vibrating in harmony with the fundamental frequency that underlies all creation. A meteor shower begins as the earth passes through the debris trail of some ancient comet, scattering sparks of light across the dark canvas of the night, and the sky fills with streak after streak of celestial fire. Each shooting star seems to carry its own gift of inspiration, and you feel your consciousness expanding to accommodate vision after vision of cosmic beauty and truth. This is the wine of the stars, an intoxication even more profound than what you tasted in the earthly tavern, for it dissolves not just the boundaries between souls, but the barriers between individual consciousness and the infinite awareness that encompasses all things. Aurora Borealis chooses this moment to make a rare appearance at these southern latitudes, its ghostly curtains of light dancing across the northern horizon like the veils of some cosmic beloved, performing the ultimate dance of divine revelation. The colors shift from green to gold to rose, each hue a different aspect of the divine beauty that cannot be contained in any single form, but must express itself through endless variation and transformation. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into union with the cosmic dance. In the midst of this celestial display, you become aware of other figures sharing the hilltop with you. Not physical forms, but conscious presences drawn to this place by the same magnetic pull that brought you here. Some you recognize as fellow students of Hafez's poetry, others as mystics and astronomers from different ages and traditions, all united by their shared devotion to reading the Book of Heaven with the eyes of the heart. One presence feels particularly familiar, a consciousness imbued with the same quality of inspired verse that flows through Hafez's ghazals. You realize that you are in communion with the poet himself, not as a historical figure from 7 centuries past, but as a living principle of divine inspiration that continues to move through all who open themselves to receive the stellar wisdom. See, his voiceless voice whispers through the star-scattered darkness, how the same divine light that illuminates these distant suns also kindles the flame of love in the human heart. There is no separation between the cosmic and the intimate, between the movement of galaxies and the beating of a lover's pulse. All is one vast poem written by the beloved's hand across the scroll of existence. A moon reaches its zenith, and its light transforms the landscape below into a silver tapestry where every tree and building seems to glow with inner radiance. The city of Shiraz spreads before you like a constellation fallen to earth, each lamp a star in the terrestrial heaven that mirrors the celestial realm above. You walk and you listen, and you feel yourself becoming a bridge between earth and sky. A night advances toward its deepest hour, and the stars reveal their ultimate secret. They are not distant suns burning in the void, but neurons in the cosmic brain of divine consciousness, carrying messages of love and wisdom across the infinite neural network of creation. Your own awareness becomes part of this vast intelligence, contributing its small light to the stellar conversation that has been continuing since the first moment of cosmic awakening. In this expansion of consciousness, you understand the deepest meaning of Hafez's verses about predestination and free will. The stars do not determine human fate like some celestial mechanism, but rather provide a cosmic context within which individual choices can be made, with full awareness of their place in the larger pattern of divine purpose. Freedom and destiny are not opposites, but complementary aspects of the same cosmic dance. The great spiral of Andromeda becomes visible as a faint smudge of light near the constellation of its namesake. And in that distant galaxy, you glimpse the vast scale on which divine creativity operates. Billions of stars arranged in patterns of unimaginable beauty, each one potentially warming worlds where other forms of consciousness contemplate their own versions of the same cosmic mystery that draws you upward tonight. A profound peace settles over the hilltop as the night reaches its deepest point, and in this stellar silence, you experience what Hafez called the peace of the spheres, the profound rest that comes when individual consciousness stops struggling against cosmic will and allows itself to be carried by the same divine current that moves the stars in their courses. Your breathing has become so slow and deep that it seems to synchronize with the rotation of the earth itself, each inhalation drawing in starlight, each exhalation releasing prayers that join the cosmic hymn of praise that emerges from every point of conscious awareness in the universe. You're no longer a separate being observing the stars, but a focal point through which stellar consciousness observes itself. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into the stellar consciousness that encompasses all things. The hours pass in a state of expanded awareness that makes ordinary time seem like a childhood game that has lost its power to fascinate. Past and future collapse into an eternal present moment that contains all the light that has ever shone and ever will shine across the cosmic distances. In this timeless now, you commune with all the seekers who have ever climbed hills under starry skies, all the poets who have ever tried to capture celestial beauty in earthly words. As the first hint of dawn begins to pale the eastern horizon, you realize that your night of stellar communion is drawing to a close. but the light that begins to erase the visible stars only makes more apparent the invisible light that connects all things in the web of cosmic consciousness. You are not losing the stars, but discovering that their light has become part of your permanent awareness, a stellar flame that will illuminate your path long after the sun has risen. The planet Venus, herald of dawn, hangs like a beacon in the growing light, reminding you that every ending is also a beginning. Every sunset, the promise of another sunrise. The stellar wisdom you have received tonight will continue to unfold within you, revealing new layers of meaning as you journey deeper into the mystical world that Hafez opened through his inspired verse. You rise slowly from your vigil, feeling the marble pavilion release you gently from its embrace, while somehow remaining forever part of your expanded consciousness. The city of Shiraz awakens in the valley below, its inhabitants beginning another day of earthly concerns, unaware that the same cosmic intelligence that guided you through your stellar journey also guides them through every moment of their apparently ordinary lives. As you begin your descent from the hilltop, you carry within you the stellar fire that transforms all who receive it. Like Hafez himself, you have learned to read the signatures of divine love, written in light across the darkness of space. Every star you glimpse tonight has become a permanent part of your inner constellation, a source of guidance and inspiration that will illuminate your path for all the days and nights to come. You walk and you listen, and you prepare to carry the stellar wisdom into the next phase of your journey through the mystical realms where sacred scripture and cosmic consciousness meet in perfect harmony. The path down the hillside seems luminous with reflected starlight, and your footsteps ring with a music that echoes both the celestial harmonies you heard during your vigil and the earthly rhythms that call you toward your next destination. The night of stellar communion has prepared you to understand how divine revelation flows through sacred text, with the same cosmic intelligence that moves the stars in their eternal dance. Chapter 4. Echoes of the Holy Word. The eastern sky blushes with the first rose light of dawn as you descend from the star-drunk hilltop, carrying within your consciousness the stellar fire that will illuminate all your remaining steps through the mystical landscape of Hafez's inspiration. Your feet find their way along ancient paths that lead toward the heart of old Shiraz, where the morning call to prayer will soon echo from minarets that have witnessed 7 centuries of souls turning toward the divine source. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You feel the sacred rhythms of the city awakening around you. The narrow streets wind between walls of sun-baked brick and carved wooden doorways, each turn revealing glimpses of courtyards where fountain spray catches the early light like scattered prayers made visible. The air carries the mingled fragrances of baking bread and brewing tea, roses blooming in hidden gardens, and the subtle incense of sanctity that rises from places where human hearts have turned repeatedly toward the divine over long centuries of devotion. A distant voice begins the first call to prayer, its Arabic syllables floating across the city like a gentle river that carries all consciousness toward its source. Other voices join from other minarets, creating a chorus that seems to emerge from the very stones of the ancient buildings, as if the city itself has learned to pray through the accumulated devotion of countless generations. You pause in a small square where a fountain plays beneath an ancient mulberry tree, and you listen as the call to prayer weaves itself into the fabric of the morning. The words are in Arabic, but their meaning flows into your heart directly. God is most great. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. Come to prayer, come to success. You walk and you listen, and you feel yourself being drawn into the river of prayer that flows through all existence. The call leads you to a modest building whose simple exterior gives no hint of the treasures contained within. This is where Hafez came daily to fulfill his duty as a Hafiz, one who has memorized the entire Quran and can recite its verses with the musical precision that transforms sacred text into direct spiritual experience. The doorway stands open like a mouth ready to speak words of ultimate truth to any heart prepared to receive them. You step across this threshold and enter a space that seems to exist outside the normal flow of time. The interior is lit by oil lamps whose flames burn with unusual steadiness, as if the very air here has been sanctified by centuries of recitation and made stable by long contact with divine truth. The walls are lined with wooden shelves holding copies of the Quran in various calligraphic styles, each one a visual prayer, a meditation in sacred geometry and flowing script. Carpets cover the floor in patterns that echo the mathematical harmonies underlying cosmic order. Geometric designs that suggest infinite expansion from divine unity. Floral motifs that celebrate the creative abundance that flows from the source of all being. You remove your shoes and feel the soft wool beneath your feet, each step becoming an act of reverence for the sacred ground where heaven touches earth through revealed word. In an alcove near the eastern wall, you discover the place where Hafez conducted his morning recitations. A simple wooden lectern holds an ancient copy of the Quran, its pages worn soft by countless turnings, its margins decorated with illuminated verses that seem to glow with their own inner light. Behind the lectern, prayer beads hang from a wooden peg, each bead smooth with the touch of fingers that counted the beautiful names of God through long nights of remembrance. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into the sanctuary of revealed truth. As you approach this sacred space, you become aware of a presence that has never left it. The consciousness of Hafez himself, not as a ghost haunting his former place of worship, but as a principle of divine recitation that continues to flow through all who approach sacred text with purified hearts and surrendered souls. His spirit moves through the very air like the fragrance of roses, like the sound of water flowing over ancient stones, filling the air with timeless harmony and peace, like the wordless music that emerges when human breath becomes the vehicle for divine speech. You settle onto a prayer rug placed before the lectern And as you do so, the ancient Quran seems to open itself to a page chosen not by chance, but by the same divine guidance that led you through the garden of earthly beauty, the tavern of mystical wine, and the stellar observatory of cosmic consciousness. The Arabic script flows across the page like a river of liquid light, each letter a drop of divine mercy condensed into visible form. Though you may not read Arabic with your earthly eyes, the stellar wine you drank on the hilltop has opened inner organs of perception that can taste the meaning of revealed word directly, without the mediation of mental translation. The verses begin to glow with significance that bypasses the mind entirely and speaks to the depths of consciousness where individual soul meets universal spirit. The first verse that draws your attention speaks of light upon light. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. The example of his light is like a niche within which is a lamp. The lamp is within glass, the glass as if it were a brilliantly shining star. As these words form in your awareness, you remember the stellar fire you witnessed during your night vigil, and you understand that the same divine light illuminates both the celestial spheres and the pages of Holy Scripture. You walk and you listen and you feel the boundaries dissolving between cosmic and scriptural revelation. Another verse draws your inner eye, and wherever you turn, there is the face of Allah. These words seem to echo with all your previous experiences, the divine beauty glimpsed in the rose garden, the divine love tasted in the mystical tavern, the divine intelligence perceived in the movement of stars and planets. Sacred scripture is confirming what your journey has already revealed. There is no place where the divine presence is absent, no experience that does not contain the potential for direct encounter with ultimate reality. As you continue to contemplate the open pages, you begin to understand how Hafez could find no contradiction between his roles as guardian of orthodox scripture and celebrant of mystical love. The Quran itself speaks repeatedly of divine beauty, divine love, divine intoxication with the wonder of creation. The wine that Hafez praised in his ghazals flows from the same source as the verses he recited in his daily prayers. Both are expressions of divine consciousness, delighting in its own infinite creativity. A verse about divine mercy captures your attention. And my mercy encompasses all things. In these words, you hear an echo of the boundless compassion you felt in the tavern, where all seekers were welcomed, regardless of their particular path or level of understanding. The same mercy that includes wine drinkers and Orthodox believers in its embrace also encompasses stars and roses, nightingales and human lovers, every form through which divine consciousness expresses its longing for recognition and return. The morning light grows stronger, streaming through the sanctuary's windows and creating patterns of gold and shadow that seem to mirror the alternation of revelation and mystery that characterizes all authentic spiritual experience. In this interplay of light and darkness, you see a symbol of how divine truth reveals itself, now clearly, now veiled, always perfectly adapted to the capacity of the consciousness receiving it. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into the ocean of revealed wisdom. Without any conscious decision on your part, you find yourself beginning to recite the verses that have been drawing your attention. Your voice joining the chorus of all who have ever allowed sacred text to flow through their breath and transform ordinary speech into direct divine expression. The Arabic syllables emerge from your throat with surprising ease, as if some deeper level of your being has always known this language of the heart that transcends all cultural and linguistic boundaries. As you recite, each verse becomes a doorway through which divine consciousness enters your awareness and transforms it from within. The words are not merely information about divine reality, but actual vehicles of divine presence, carrying the reader across the apparent gap between human and ultimate consciousness. This is why Hafez could spend his entire life reciting the same verses without ever exhausting their meaning. Each recitation opens new depths, reveals new connections, awakens new capacities for divine recognition. The rhythm of Quranic recitation begins to synchronize with your heartbeat and breathing, creating a state of consciousness where individual will dissolves into divine will, where personal voice becomes transparent to the voice of ultimate truth. In this state, you understand experientially what it means to be a Hafiz, not merely someone who has memorized sacred text, but someone who has become a living repository of divine revelation, a human heart that has been transformed into a library of divine wisdom. A verse about the creation of humanity draws your attention, and we breathed into him of our spirit. These words seem to ignite something within your chest, a recognition that the same divine breath that gave life to the first human being continues to move through every moment of authentic spiritual experience. The breath with which you recite sacred verse is the same breath with which the universe speaks itself into existence moment by moment. You walk and you listen, and you feel yourself becoming a conscious instrument of divine self-expression. The recitation continues without effort on your part, as if the verses themselves are choosing to flow through your voice, selecting exactly those passages that your consciousness is prepared to receive and integrate. You encounter the verse that speaks of God as closer than the jugular vein, words that seem to vibrate in your very blood, confirming the intimate presence you have felt throughout your journey through Hafez's world of inspiration. Another verse speaks of those whom he loves and who love him, and in these words you recognize the mutual attraction between divine and human consciousness that generates all authentic mystical experience. The love that draws the nightingale to the rose, that intoxicates the seeker in the tavern, that lifts the soul toward the stars, is the same love that flows between the verses of revealed scripture and the hearts prepared to receive them. As your recitation deepens, you become aware that you are not alone in this sanctuary. Other figures sit in meditation around the walls, some physically present, others existing in that timeless realm where all genuine seekers gather, regardless of their historical epoch. Each consciousness adds its own note to the symphony of recitation, creating harmonies that seem to encompass not just human voices, but the voices of angels, the praise offered by mountains and trees, the glorification that emerges from every atom in creation. The presence of Hafez becomes particularly vivid as you recite verses about divine beauty and mercy. You feel his consciousness joining with yours in a communion that transcends the boundaries of individual personality, creating a shared space where the same divine inspiration that flowed through his poetry continues to move through all who approach sacred text with hearts prepared by long pilgrimage through the landscapes of spiritual seeking. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply. You drift farther into the collective consciousness of all who serve as vessels for divine revelation. The verses you recite begin to reveal their connections to all your previous experiences on this mystical journey. The Quranic description of paradise as gardens with flowing rivers echoes your experience in the rose garden, where you first sensed Hafez's presence. The references to divine wine and the intoxication of the righteous resonate with your night in the mystical tavern. The passages about stars as guides for travelers speak directly to your stellar vigil and the cosmic consciousness you touched beneath the night sky. You realize that sacred scripture is not separate from the natural world and human experience, but rather provides the interpretive key that reveals the divine significance hidden within all phenomena. The same divine consciousness that revealed itself through the prophet's reception of Quranic verses also reveals itself through roses blooming in earthly gardens, through wine shared among sincere seekers, through the stellar wisdom that flows from contemplation of the night sky. As the morning advances, your recitation gradually slows and deepens, each verse receiving longer contemplation, each word becoming a universe of meaning to be explored with the patience of eternity. The Arabic script on the page before you seems to pulse with living light, as if the ink itself has become transparent to the divine source from which all sacred language springs. A verse about the diversity of human languages and colors as signs for those who reflect draws your attention to the way divine revelation adapts itself to every cultural context while remaining essentially unchanged. The same truth that spoke Arabic through Muhammad's lips also spoke Persian through Hafez's poetry, speaks every human language through those who have learned to listen with the heart rather than merely with the mind. You walk and you listen and you feel yourself becoming part of the eternal conversation between divine revelation and human consciousness. The oil lamps around the sanctuary seem to burn brighter as your recitation continues, as if your voice is providing fuel for their flames, as if the sacred words themselves generate the light by which they can be read and contemplated. This is the self-sustaining nature of authentic spiritual practice. The more completely one surrenders to serving as a vessel for divine expression, the more divine grace flows through that vessel to illumine and sustain the practice. Other verses call to you from the open pages, passages about the divine names and qualities that Hafez wove so skillfully into his ghazals, transforming theological concepts into living poetry that speaks directly to the heart. He is the first and the last, the outward and the inward, words that seem to encompass your entire journey from the visible beauty of earthly gardens to the invisible beauty of stellar consciousness, and now to this moment, where outward scripture and inward realization meet in perfect unity. The morning call to prayer echoes again from the city's minarets, and you realize that hours have passed in what seemed like moments as you allowed sacred text to work its transformation within your consciousness. But time has been sanctified by this encounter with revealed truth, transformed from mere duration into what the mystics call sacred time, moments pregnant with eternity, ordinary minutes that open onto infinite depths of meaning and significance. As the second call to prayer fades into the morning air, you become aware that your individual recitation has been part of a vast global chorus, millions of voices around the world engaged in the same practice of allowing divine revelation to flow through human breath and transform ordinary consciousness into a mirror capable of reflecting ultimate truth. This is the true Ummah, a community bound by the shared rhythm of spiritual devotion, the community that transcends all boundaries of nation and ethnicity and historical period, the congregation of all who serve as conscious vessels for divine self-expression. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply. You drift farther into the realization that sacred scripture and mystical experience are not opposites, but complementary aspects of a single revelation. The Quran begins to close itself as your morning recitation draws toward completion, but you understand that this apparent ending is actually the moment of fullest opening, the point at which the verses you have internalized begin their work of transformation within the depths of consciousness, where divine and human meet in intimate communion. The seeds of sacred language planted through recitation will continue to grow and flower throughout your continuing journey, revealing new meanings and connections as your capacity for divine recognition expands. You sit in the silence that follows recitation, not an empty silence, but one pregnant with all the divine names and qualities that have been invoked through your voice, all the verses that have taken root in the prepared soil of your heart, all the connections that have been established between your individual consciousness and the cosmic intelligence that speaks through revealed scripture to all who have ears to hear. In this sanctified silence, you feel the presence of all the great reciters and interpreters of sacred text who have ever lived, not just Islamic scholars and Hafizes, but all who have served as bridges between divine revelation and human understanding. Moses receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai, Jesus speaking the Sermon on the Mount, the Buddha turning the wheel of Dharma, Lao Tzu writing verses about the Tao that cannot be named. All are present in this moment where sacred language reveals its universal source. The morning light streaming through the sanctuary windows seems to carry visible blessings now, as if your recitation has made the very air transparent to divine grace. Each ray of sunlight becomes a verse of cosmic scripture, each particle of dust dancing in the golden beams, a letter in the infinite book of divine self-revelation that is written moment by moment across the scroll of existence. You walk and you listen and you feel yourself being prepared for the final movement of your journey through Hafez's mystical universe. As you prepare to leave this sanctuary of revealed truth, you understand that you are not departing from the sacred text, but carrying it with you as a living presence within your consciousness. Like Hafez himself, you have learned to find the same divine beauty in Quranic verses and Persian poetry, in Orthodox prayer and mystical wine, forever embracing the harmony of the cosmos in the letter of sacred law and the spirit of divine love that transcends all forms while expressing itself through every form that opens itself to receive divine inspiration. The Quran you leave behind on its wooden lectern will continue its work of transformation with other seekers who are drawn to this place. But the verses that have entered your heart through sincere recitation will continue their journey with you, revealing new depths and applications as you encounter the diverse manifestations of divine beauty in the world beyond this sanctuary. You step toward the doorway where morning light waits to embrace you, carrying within your consciousness the rhythms of sacred recitation that will continue to pulse through your awareness like a second heartbeat, a constant reminder of your true nature as a vessel through which divine consciousness knows and expresses itself. The words you have spoken will continue to speak themselves through your transformed awareness, turning every breath into prayer, every heartbeat into remembrance, every encounter with beauty into recognition of the divine source from which all beauty flows. As you cross the threshold back into the ordinary world, you carry with you the extraordinary realization that there is no ordinary world, only the divine consciousness expressing itself through infinite forms and inviting recognition through every possible doorway of human experience. Sacred scripture has taught you to read the signatures of divine presence written into every moment, every encounter, every breath of your continuing journey through the mystical landscape where Hafez discovered that divine love is the wine that intoxicates all creation with the joy of its own infinite being. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply, you prepare to enter the final movement of your pilgrimage through time and eternity, carrying all the wisdom you have gathered toward its ultimate flowering in the recognition that every ending is also an eternal beginning. Chapter 5: Eternal Inspiration. You walk through time itself now, your footsteps echoing across centuries like ripples on the surface of an ancient pool. The garden paths you have wandered, the tavern stones you have touched, the starlit courtyards where you have lingered, all these sacred spaces begin to shimmer and blend, becoming one eternal moment where past and present dance together in a gentle embrace of forever. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply, you drift farther into the realm where Hafez's words have taken root in the soil of human hearts, growing like rose bushes that bloom across the seasons of time, their fragrance carrying on winds that know no borders, no boundaries, no ending. A morning light that first welcomed you in those dawn-lit gardens of Shiraz has never truly set. It has traveled, the same golden radiance, across the curved horizon of the world, touching the faces of countless souls who have opened their hearts to receive the whispered wisdom of the master poet. You feel this light now, warm upon your skin, as you walk through a space that exists both everywhere and nowhere, the eternal garden where inspiration lives and breathes and multiplies like seeds on the wind. You listen, and you hear them, the voices of those who have carried Hafez's verses in their hearts across the turning wheels of centuries. In Baghdad, a merchant recites a ghazal beneath the shade of date palms, his voice joining the ancient rhythm of commerce and prayer along the Tigris. In Istanbul, a calligrapher's pen moves like a dancing dervish across parchment, each curve and flourish breathing life into verses that speak of wine and roses, of the divine beloved who appears in every face, every flower, every moment of wonder. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply, and you hear the soft footsteps of a young woman in 19th century Vienna, walking through moonlit streets with a worn translation tucked close to her heart. She has discovered Hafez through the wandering words of Goethe, who himself had drunk deep from the Persian fountain and declared his soul twin to this singer of Shiraz. Her fingers trace the lines that speak of love's sweet intoxication, and in her reading, something ancient awakens, the same spirit that first stirred in those rose-scented gardens 700 years ago. The tavern where you listened to wine's mystical teachings has multiplied itself across the world like reflections in 1,000 mirrors. You see them now, these sacred spaces of gathering and sharing, where Hafez's words flow like honey wine from lip to ear. In a coffee house in Cairo, where the smoke of hookahs mingles with the incense of devotion, an old storyteller weaves the poet's verses through tales of jinn and sultans, inviting you to listen, to feel, to drift into the timeless dance of words and whispers, each syllable carrying the listener deeper into the realm where the mystical and the worldly embrace. You drift farther and find yourself in the reading rooms of distant universities, where scholars bend over manuscripts like gardeners tending rare blooms. Their translations bloom slowly, each word chosen with the care of one arranging flowers for the beloved. They struggle to capture in foreign tongues the music that flows so naturally in Persian. Yet something essential always passes through, the essence of longing, the perfume of the divine mystery that Hafez knew how to distill into verses brief as sighs, deep as oceans. The stars that guided your contemplation in those midnight courtyards still wheel overhead, their light reaching across the vast spaces of the universe to kindle new inspirations. You see a young poet in modern Tehran, sitting beside the tomb of Hafez itself, the marble worn smooth by countless pilgrims' hands. She opens the divan at random, seeking Fall, the oracle of the beloved master, and the verse that greets her eyes seems to have been written for this very moment, this very question that weighs upon her heart. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply, and you understand that this is how eternity works, not as an endless line stretching forward, but as a moment that deepens and expands, encompassing all moments, holding all seeking hearts in its gentle embrace. In the chambers where you witnessed the sacred fusion of Quranic rhythm and poetic inspiration, that same mysterious alchemy continues to unfold. You see it in the prayer rugs of Istanbul, where the faithful pause between their devotions to murmur a line from Hafez that seems to capture perfectly the yearning they cannot otherwise express. You see it in the meditation halls of modern seekers, where East meets West in the universal language of the heart's longing for the divine beloved. The wine cup that Hafez raised in celebration of divine love has been passed from hand to hand across the generations, its contents never diminishing, always full of the same intoxicating draught that transforms the drinker's vision, revealing the sacred hidden within the seemingly mundane. You taste it now on your own lips, not the fermented grape, but something infinitely more refined, the essence of joy that comes from recognizing the beloved in every form, every face, every moment of beauty that graces this world. You drift farther into this eternal space, and you begin to understand that you yourself have become part of this continuing story. Your presence in these sacred spaces, the gardens, the tavern, the starlit courtyards, the prayer chambers, has woven you into the tapestry that Hafez began with his first verse and that continues to grow with each new reader, each new listener, each new heart that opens to receive the gift of his vision. In a library in London, an elderly professor closes his eyes and recites from memory the verses he first learned as a student in Mumbai, the words carrying him back across decades to the moment when he first understood that poetry could be a form of worship, that beauty itself could be a prayer. His voice, barely above a whisper, joins the endless chorus of those who have found in Hafez's words a doorway to something larger than themselves. You listen, and you hear the gentle weeping of lovers in moonlit gardens from Cordoba to Samarkand, their tears falling like dewdrops on roses, each drop carrying within it the salt of longing and the sweetness of hope. They quote Hafez to the night wind, their voices joining the eternal conversation between the heart and its beloved, between the seeker and the sought, between the cup and the wine that fills it to overflowing. A young musician in modern-day Shiraz sits with her santoor, its strings catching the last light of evening as her fingers dance across them, creating melodies to carry the weight of ancient words. She has set Hafez's ghazals to new music, yet something timeless flows through her compositions. The same yearning that moved the poet's heart, the same joy that bubbled up from the depths of his mystical experience like a spring that never runs dry. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply, and you begin to sense the true nature of this eternal inspiration that flows through Hafez's legacy. It is not merely that his words have survived, though survive they have, copied and recopied, translated and retranslated, memorized and recited until they have become part of the very fabric of human expression. It is that something living moves through them, something that awakens in each new encounter, fresh as morning dew, yet ancient as the stars. In the quiet corners of bookshops, from Paris to Delhi, fingers trace the spines of volumes that carry his name, and with each touch, a small electric current passes, the recognition that here lies something precious, something that has the power to transform an ordinary evening into a journey toward the ineffable. The books open themselves like flowers turning toward the sun, and the words rise from the page like incense, filling the air with the fragrance of possibilities previously unimagined. You drift through the dreams of students who fall asleep with his verses as their last conscious thought. And in their sleeping minds, you see gardens more beautiful than any earthly paradise, wine more intoxicating than any vintage pressed from mortal grapes. These dream gardens become real gardens as the inspiration received in sleep translates into waking action, new poems written, new melodies composed, new gardens planted where roses grow in patterns that echo the geometric beauty of Persian verse. The fountain that sang to you in those dawn gardens continues its song in 1,000 places, its water taking new forms while retaining its essential nature. In the courtyards of madrasas, where young voices recite and memorize, learning to let the words flow through them like water finding its natural course. In the private chambers, where lovers whisper lines to each other that Hafez wrote for the eternal beloved, finding in his mystical passion the language for their own earthly devotion. You listen, and you hear the scratching of countless pens across paper, the clicking of keyboards in the digital age, all carrying forward the impulse that first moved Hafez to give voice to his visions. A contemporary poet in Los Angeles writes of urban alienation, but finds in Hafez's celebration of wine and roses a way to discover the sacred within the cityscape. A blogger in Mumbai shares daily verses as morning meditation. Her followers around the world beginning each day with a taste of Shiraz honey. In translation workshops from Oxford to Tehran, scholars gather around tables like disciples around a master, each bringing their own language's unique gifts to the eternal challenge of carrying Hafez's meaning across the bridges of human understanding. They argue gently over word choices, each decision carrying the weight of responsibility to the original vision, while acknowledging that something new must be born in each language. Not a copy, but a new flowering from the same root. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply, and you drift into a space where you can see the intricate web of influence that spreads out from Hafez like ripples from a stone cast into still water. Goethe's West-Östlicher Divan, inspired by his encounter with Hafez's work, becomes itself a bridge between cultures. Emerson reads Hafez in Goethe's German and carries the Persian poet's vision into the American transcendentalist movement, where it mingles with New England landscapes, yet retains its essential fragrance of roses and wine. The ghazals echo through the jazz clubs of 20th century America, where musicians who have never read Hafez nevertheless catch something of his rhythm, his way of building intensity through repetition and variation, his ability to find the sacred in the most earthly of pleasures. The same impulse that led him to sing of wine and love leads them to find divinity in blue notes and syncopated rhythms, the sacred hiding in plain sight within the realm of human passion and celebration. You walk now through virtual spaces where his words travel at the speed of light, appearing on screens in languages he never imagined, reaching hearts in corners of the world he never knew existed. A video call connects readers in Tehran and Toronto, their shared love of his poetry creating an intimacy that spans continents. Social media feeds carry his verses to millions of eyes in seconds, each reading creating a small moment of pause in the rush of modern life, a breath of ancient air in the contemporary world's mechanical rhythms. You drift farther, and you begin to understand that this eternal quality of Hafez's inspiration comes not from the preservation of his words alone, but from their capacity to awaken something that was already present in the human heart. He did not create the longing for the divine beloved, he simply gave it voice. He did not invent the joy that bubbles up from recognizing beauty. He simply showed others how to taste it consciously, how to let it intoxicate them with its sweetness. In hospitals, where nurses recite his verses to comfort the dying, his words about the eternal nature of love provide solace that transcends the boundaries of particular religious traditions. In refugee camps, where people carry little but the treasures stored in memory, his ghazals offer a portable homeland, a way of maintaining connection to beauty and meaning despite displacement and loss. The wine cup that symbolized spiritual intoxication in his time has taken countless new forms across the centuries. You see it in the communion chalices, where his influence has subtly shaped Christian mysticism, in the tea ceremonies, where his sense of mindful attention to the present moment has informed Buddhist practice, in the meditation cushions, where contemporary seekers discover that his path of divine love translates perfectly into modern spiritual exploration. You listen, and you hear children in Iranian American communities learning to recite his verses in Persian classes, their young voices carrying forward sounds and rhythms that have flowed unbroken from generation to generation. Yet, even as they preserve the traditional forms, something new emerges in their accent, their inflection, their way of understanding, proving that true tradition is not museum preservation, but living transmission, each new voice adding its own note to the eternal symphony. In the studios of contemporary Persian musicians, traditional instruments blend with modern production techniques, creating soundscapes that Hafez himself could never have imagined, yet would instantly recognize as kin to his own artistic vision. The santur and ney carry melodies that could have graced his original performances, while electronic elements add layers of resonance that mirror the infinite depths his poetry continues to reveal to new readers. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply, and you drift into awareness of the academic conferences and literary festivals where scholars and poets gather to explore his continuing relevance. Yet even in these formal settings, something intimate and personal emerges whenever his verses are read aloud. The room grows quiet, the analytical mind gives way to something more receptive, and for a moment, everyone present becomes part of that eternal gathering in the mystical tavern where wine flows freely, and every word spoken adds to the celebration of divine love. The manuscripts that preserve his work have themselves become objects of veneration, their careful calligraphy and illuminated borders creating visual experiences that mirror the beauty of the verses they contain. You trace with your inner eye the gold leaf that catches candlelight in medieval libraries, the indigo and vermilion that frame his words like gardens frame fountains, the patient work of scribes who understood that they were not merely copying text, but participating in an act of devotion. In modern publishing houses, editors work late into the night, preparing new editions, new translations, new collections that will carry his work to readers not yet born. They debate typefaces and paper quality, understanding that the physical experience of reading his poetry matters, that the texture of the page and the rhythm of the line breaks all contribute to the reader's journey into the mystical realm his words create. You drift through the dreams of translators who wake in the middle of the night with sudden insights into meanings that had eluded them for months. The perfect English or French or Spanish phrase finally revealing itself, like a flower opening at just the right moment. They keep notebooks beside their beds, knowing that inspiration works on its own schedule, that the bridge between languages sometimes builds itself in the liminal space between sleep and waking. You walk through anniversary celebrations in Shiraz, where thousands gather at his tomb each year, the crowd a living river of devotion that flows around the marble resting place of one whose words have never truly died. They come carrying flowers and poetry, their own verses written in response to his, creating a dialogue across time that proves the living nature of literary tradition. In the homes of ordinary readers around the world, his books rest on nightstands and coffee tables, their pages worn soft from repeated readings, margin notes accumulated over years of return visits to familiar verses. Each book becomes a landscape shaped by its reader's journey. Certain passages underlined in different colors, representing different seasons of understanding, different moods, different needs that his inexhaustible treasury of images could meet. You listen, and you hear the quiet conversations between friends who share favorite passages, the intimate gift of offering someone else a line that has sustained you through difficulty or amplified your joy. His verses become part of the vocabulary of human connection, appearing in letters between lovers separated by distance, in emails between friends seeking to express what ordinary language cannot capture, in the margins of diaries where his wisdom mingles with contemporary struggles and discoveries. Teachers in classrooms from London to Los Angeles find in his work a doorway to discussions about the universal nature of love, the relationship between earthly and divine beauty, the courage required to speak honestly about spiritual longing in a world often hostile to such vulnerability. Their students, initially perhaps drawn by exotic images of Persian gardens and wine-dark mysteries, discover that his insights into the human condition speak as directly to their contemporary concerns as to those of 14th century Shiraz. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply, and you drift into understanding that this eternal quality emerges not from the preservation of historical artifacts, but from the living encounter that happens each time someone truly meets his work. Reading Hafez becomes a form of time travel, not back to a dead past, but into the eternal present, where all genuine spiritual seeking takes place. A young mother in contemporary Tehran reads his lullabies to her daughter, the same verses that mothers have whispered to children for generations, creating an unbroken chain of tenderness that spans the centuries. The child will carry these rhythms in her bones, and when she grows and has children of her own, the words will emerge from some deep place in memory, proving that poetry, like love itself, reproduces itself naturally across the generations. In retreat centers, where people go to step away from the noise of modern life, his verses provide the perfect soundtrack for contemplation. Reading groups gather in circles, taking turns speaking his words aloud, discovering that his ghazals were designed for this kind of sharing, that their beauty multiplies when experienced in community rather than solitude. You walk through the galleries where visual artists have found inspiration in his imagery, paintings that attempt to capture the rose gardens of his metaphors, sculptures that embody the flowing movement of his verse, installations that create physical spaces for entering the mystical tavern he described so vividly. Each artistic interpretation becomes itself a new doorway, a fresh entrance into the realm his poetry creates. The publishing history of his work tells its own story of eternal inspiration. From the earliest manuscript copies made by devoted students to the first printed editions that spread his work beyond the manuscript tradition. From the Victorian Orientalist translations that introduced him to European audiences, to the contemporary versions that strive for greater fidelity to his original voice. Each new presentation of his work reflects its time period's understanding, while revealing new facets of meaning that perhaps even Hafez himself never consciously intended. You drift farther, and you encounter the digital archives where his complete works exist in searchable databases, where scholars can trace the evolution of specific images across his collected poems, where algorithms can identify patterns that reveal the deep structures underlying his seemingly spontaneous inspiration. Yet even in this most technological of presentations, something essentially human and mystical persists. The capacity of his words to stop the hurried reader in their tracks, to create a moment of pause and wonder that no algorithm can quite capture or explain. Music flows through this eternal space like an underground river, surfacing in the compositions of modern Iranian musicians who set his ghazals to contemporary arrangements, in the world music festivals where his verses provide lyrics for fusion compositions that blend Persian classical traditions with jazz, electronic, and folk influences from around the globe. The melodies change, but something essential in the rhythm of his poetry always emerges, proving its kinship with music its origin in the same source from which all arts spring. You listen, and you hear the voices of those who have found in his work not just aesthetic pleasure, but practical wisdom for living. The business executive in Shanghai, who begins each day with a verse about finding joy in simple pleasures, learning to see her corporate responsibilities through the lens of service to the divine beloved. The farmer in rural Greece, who quotes Hafez while tending his olive groves, finding in the Persian poet's celebration of nature and seasons a language for his own relationship with the land. You breathe slowly. You listen deeply into a recognition that his influence moves like underground streams, often invisible, yet always present. Writers who have never consciously studied Hafez find themselves drawn to images of roses and nightingales, to the theme of divine love disguised as earthly passion, to the voice that can speak simultaneously as mystic and rebel, lover and philosopher. ... The psychological insight embedded in his work continues to offer guidance to each new generation's particular struggles. In support groups where people share their stories of addiction and recovery, his understanding of spiritual intoxication provides a vocabulary for describing the difference between substances that enslave and experiences that liberate. In therapy sessions where individuals explore the relationship between human love and spiritual seeking, his model of the divine beloved offers a framework for understanding how personal relationships can serve as doorways to transcendent experience. You walk through the spaces where his influence has shaped not just literature, but the very architecture of spiritual seeking. Sufi centers around the world echo with his verses during dhikr ceremonies, the repetitive remembrance of divine names, taking on new meaning when filtered through his understanding of how repetition can become a form of mystical intoxication. His wine imagery infuses their practice with joy, warmth, and a deep connection to the essence of life. You feel it in the air, the gentle rustling of leaves in a Persian garden, where the water flows softly and the scent of jasmine mingles with the cool breeze. Each detail, each sound, wraps around you like a comforting embrace. You are safe, at peace, and free to drift into a world of tranquility and timeless beauty, transforming what might otherwise be merely dutiful recitation into genuine celebration. Contemporary poets from cultures far from Persia find themselves unconsciously adopting his techniques. The way he could pack entire philosophical treatises into a few lines, his skill at using concrete images to point toward abstract truths, his mastery of the tension between revelation and concealment that makes mystical poetry so compelling. They may not know they are following in his footsteps, yet something in his approach has entered the bloodstream of global literature, influencing how poets everywhere understand their craft. You drift farther into this eternal realm and discover that his approach to handling paradox has become especially relevant to contemporary consciousness. In an age of quantum physics and digital technology, his comfort with contradiction, wine as both literal pleasure and spiritual metaphor, the beloved as both human and divine, reason as both tool and limitation, offers a way of thinking that can embrace complexity without demanding premature resolution. Mental health practitioners find in his work insights that complement modern therapeutic approaches. His understanding that joy and sorrow often interpenetrate, that mystical experience can coexist with practical wisdom, that the spiritual path requires both discipline and abandonment, provides a nuanced perspective on human psychology that honors both suffering and transcendence. You listen, and you hear his influence in the conversations between interfaith dialogue groups, where his ability to speak of divine love in language that transcends sectarian boundaries makes him a natural bridge builder. Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, and secular seekers all find in his work something they can recognize as authentic spiritual expression. His wine metaphor, translating across traditions as a symbol of whatever opens the heart to direct experience of the sacred. Environmental movement has discovered in his celebration of gardens and natural beauty a model for ecological consciousness that goes beyond mere preservation to active relationship with the natural world. Contemporary environmental poets quote his descriptions of roses and nightingales not as pretty decorations, but as examples of how human consciousness can participate in, rather than dominate, the natural world's inherent beauty and wisdom. You breathe slowly, and you drift into understanding that this eternal quality emerges from his fundamental insight into the nature of love itself. By recognizing that all authentic love, whether for a human beloved, for God, for beauty, for wisdom, for life itself, partakes of the same essential energy, he created a body of work that speaks to the core of human experience, in whatever form that experience might take. Social justice movements find unexpected resources in his work. His criticism of religious hypocrisy translating into contemporary critiques of institutional corruption. His celebration of wine's liberating power, inspiring those who work to free consciousness from whatever chains might bind it. Yet, his approach remains fundamentally spiritual rather than merely political, offering transformation of vision as the foundation for any genuine reform of external conditions. In the quiet moments between activism and rest, when even the most committed change agents need renewal for their spirits, his verses offer the wine of inspiration that sustains long-term engagement with the world's sufferings and possibilities. They discover that his mystical joy is not escapism, but the deepest form of revolutionary consciousness, the recognition that the divine beloved can be served through action in the world as much as through withdrawal from it. You walk through the meditation gardens that have been planted in his honor around the world, where the roses he celebrated in verse grow in actual soil, tended by hands that understand gardening as a form of prayer, a way of participating in the beauty that inspired his greatest insights. These gardens become places where the literal and metaphorical merge, where visitors can smell the actual fragrance that perfumed his imagination while experiencing their own moments of mystical recognition. The nightingales that sang to him in 14th century Shiraz have descendants that still sing, their voices carrying across the centuries the same melodies that moved him to poetry. Ornithologists studying bird songs discover patterns that seem to echo the rhythmic structures of his ghazals, as if nature itself were the original source from which both bird song and human poetry emerge. You drift farther into this eternal space and encounter the scholars who have dedicated their lives to understanding his work, not as mere academic exercise, but as spiritual practice. Their commentaries become forms of devotional literature, their analysis revealing layer after layer of meaning, while acknowledging that the deepest truths in his poetry remain mysteriously beyond complete explanation. They model a form of scholarship that serves love rather than mere knowledge, understanding that the greatest insights come not from mastering his work, but from allowing oneself to be mastered by it. In contemplative communities where silence is valued as much as speech, his verses provide the perfect balance, words so carefully chosen that they enhance rather than disturb the quiet, poetry that leads towards silence rather than away from it. Monks and nuns from various traditions find in his work kindred recognition of the path that leads through the many toward the one, through the wine of mystical experience toward sobriety in the divine presence. You listen, and you hear the conversations between teachers and students that happen wherever his work is studied seriously, the transmission of understanding that cannot be captured in books or lectures, but must pass directly from heart to heart. These conversations often begin with technical questions about meter and metaphor, but evolve naturally into sharing of personal spiritual experience, proving that his poetry creates the conditions for authentic spiritual community. The festivals and commemorations held in his honor around the world have become their own form of spiritual practice, gathering places where people from diverse backgrounds come together in appreciation, not just of his historical achievement, but of the living inspiration that continues to flow through his words. These events blend scholarly presentations with musical performances, traditional crafts with contemporary art, creating temporary communities united by shared recognition of beauty and meaning. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply, and you drift into awareness that you are witnessing not just the historical influence of a great poet, but the operation of inspiration itself. How authentic spiritual insight spreads through human consciousness like light spreading through water, taking the shape of whatever container holds it, while retaining its essential luminosity. Contemporary neuroscientists studying the effects of poetry on the brain find that reading Hafez activates regions associated with both linguistic processing and mystical experience, suggesting that his particular gift lay in creating verses that engage multiple dimensions of consciousness simultaneously. Yet their most sophisticated instruments cannot measure what every sensitive reader knows: that something transformative happens in the encounter with his work that goes beyond what brain scans can detect. The Therapeuts, where his verses are used not as literature, but as doorways to healing, discover that his understanding of love's paradoxes provides particularly powerful medicine for contemporary psychological wounds. His ability to hold together seemingly contradictory emotions, joy and sorrow, certainty and doubt, ecstasy and sobriety, offers a model for psychological health that embraces, rather than tries to resolve, the fundamental tensions of human existence. You walk through the spaces where his work has influenced not just individual readers, but entire cultural movements. The Iranian Revolution of the 20th century found in his verses about freedom and authenticity a vocabulary for articulating resistance to oppression, while simultaneously discovering in his mystical teachings resources for maintaining spiritual perspective amid political turmoil. His ability to critique external authority while celebrating inner authority provided a template for conscious revolution, transformation that begins in consciousness rather than simply rearranging external power structures. The feminist scholars who have found in his treatment of the divine beloved a way of understanding how mystical love can transcend rather than reinforce conventional gender roles, discovering in his verses possibilities for human relationship that honor both equality and mystery, both passion and transcendence. His wine metaphor becomes for them a symbol of consciousness freed from all limiting categories, including those that would confine spiritual seeking to traditionally masculine or feminine approaches. You drift farther and you encounter the artificial intelligence systems that have been trained on his work. Digital minds attempting to learn the patterns that create mystical poetry, to understand what makes certain combinations of words open doorways in consciousness, while others remain merely clever arrangements of sound and meaning. Yet even the most sophisticated programs cannot quite capture what makes his work alive, proving that authentic inspiration involves something beyond pattern recognition, some quality of consciousness that remains mysteriously beyond mechanical reproduction. The virtual reality experiences being created around his poetry attempt to give contemporary audiences the immersive encounter with Persian garden beauty that originally inspired his verses. Users wear headsets that transport them into digital recreations of 14th century Shiraz, complete with the sounds of fountains and the fragrance of roses. Yet the most sophisticated sensory technology cannot quite substitute for the inner landscape that his words create directly in the reader's imagination. You listen, and you hear the quiet conversations happening in hospices and hospitals, where his verses about the temporary nature of earthly life and the eternal nature of love provide comfort that transcends particular religious traditions. Chaplains from various faiths find in his work language that can speak to universal human experiences of love, loss, longing, and hope for reunion with whatever each person understands as the source of all blessing. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply, and you drift into recognition that his eternal inspiration operates not by demanding belief in particular doctrines, but by awakening recognition of experiences that every human heart knows, but rarely finds adequate expression for. His genius lay not in creating something new, but in giving perfect voice to what was always already true. The children's books that adapt his stories for young audiences prove that his essential insights can be transmitted across age barriers as easily as cultural ones. Simplified retellings of his encounters with the divine beloved become fairy tales that plant seeds of mystical possibility in young imaginations, preparing future generations to recognize the sacred when they encounter it in their own lives. In the elder care facilities where residents with dementia have lost most of their recent memories, but can still recite verses they learned in childhood, his poetry proves its connection to something deeper than ordinary memory. The rhythmic beauty of his language seems to be stored in parts of the brain that remain accessible even when other faculties fade, offering evidence for his claim that true poetry participates in eternal rather than merely temporal reality. You walk through the online forums where people share their favorite verses and discuss their meanings, creating global conversations that span languages, cultures, and generations. These digital gatherings prove that his work continues to create community wherever it travels, that reading his poetry naturally leads to the desire to share the experience with others who might appreciate its particular form of beauty and insight. The marriage ceremonies, where couples choose his verses about love's eternal nature as part of their vows, demonstrate how his mystical vision continues to inform humanity's most important rituals. His understanding that earthly love can serve as a pathway to divine love provides a framework for wedding ceremonies that honor both the practical and transcendent dimensions of human partnership. You drift farther into this eternal realm and discover that his influence extends into fields that seem far from poetry. Architects designing contemplative spaces find in his descriptions of gardens and courtyards principles for creating environments that support inner reflection. Urban planners working on public spaces discover in his celebration of beauty and community resources for imagining cities that nourish the soul as well as support commerce and residents. The wine industry itself has claimed him as patron saint of sorts, not for promoting intoxication, but for his understanding of how the right kind of celebration can open consciousness to appreciation of life's deeper gifts. Vintners in regions far from Persia name their finest bottles after his verses, understanding that wine at its best aspires to be worthy of the metaphorical role he assigned to it in his mystical vision. You listen, and you hear his verses being recited in languages that did not exist when he lived, carried by peoples whose ancestors never heard Persian poetry, translated into forms of expression that would have been unimaginable in the 14th century. Yet something essential always comes through, proof that authentic inspiration transcends all the barriers that seem to separate one human heart from another. Contemporary musicians experimenting with sound therapy find that his verses, chanted or sung, create particular acoustic effects that seem to harmonize with the natural rhythms of breathing and heartbeat. Their research suggests what mystics have always known, that his poetry works on multiple levels simultaneously, engaging not just intellectual understanding, but the deeper patterns that govern physical and spiritual well-being. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply, and you drift into awareness that this eternal inspiration operates as a form of conscious evolution. Each new generation finding in his work resources for taking the next step in humanity's collective spiritual development. His verses become ladder rungs for consciousness, each reader climbing as far as their current capacity allows, while leaving the ladder in place for those who will come after. The philosophical societies that study his work discover in his approach to paradox resources for thinking about contemporary problems that seem to resist simple solutions. His comfort with contradiction, his ability to hold opposing truths in creative tension, his understanding that the deepest insights often emerge from embracing rather than resolving paradox. All these become tools for engaging with the complex challenges of contemporary existence. In the world of international diplomacy, his verses about the fundamental unity underlying apparent diversity provide language for conversations between representatives of different cultures and nations. His wine imagery becomes metaphor for the kind of celebration that transcends national boundaries. His rose garden, a symbol of the beauty that all cultures share despite their surface differences. You walk through the treatment centers where his understanding of spiritual intoxication provides alternative models for those recovering from chemical dependencies. His description of wine that liberates rather than enslaves offers hope that the desire for transcendent experience itself is healthy and holy, that addiction represents not the desire for transcendence gone wrong, but the search for it through means too small and temporary to satisfy the soul's authentic hunger. The interfaith prayer services, where his verses are read alongside scriptures from multiple traditions, demonstrate his gift for speaking a universal language of the heart, while remaining rooted in his own particular cultural and religious tradition. His work proves that the deepest kind of universalism emerges not from abandoning specificity, but from diving so deeply into one's own tradition that one touches the bedrock that underlies all authentic spiritual seeking. You drift farther and you encounter the scientific researchers studying consciousness, who find in his descriptions of mystical states remarkably accurate phenomenological accounts of experiences that contemporary neuroscience is only beginning to understand. His poetry becomes a form of data, subjective reports from the laboratory of mystical experience that complement the objective measurements of modern consciousness research. In the creative writing workshops where students learn to craft their own poetry, his techniques become teaching tools. The way he could use concrete imagery to convey abstract truths. His mastery of compression that could pack novels' worth of meaning into a few perfectly chosen words. His understanding of rhythm as a carrier of meaning that works below the level of rational comprehension. You listen, and you hear the echoes of his voice in the political poetry of contemporary resistance movements, where his model of speaking truth to power through indirection and metaphor provides tools for those living under censorship. His wine becomes their symbol of whatever cannot be suppressed by external authority. His rose garden, their image of the beauty that must be preserved and cultivated even in the most difficult circumstances. The international poetry festivals that feature his work prove how contemporary audiences hunger for the particular combination of sensuality and spirituality that he mastered. Readers who live in cultures that often separate the sacred from the pleasurable find in his verses permission to seek the divine through appreciation of earthly beauty, to understand that the path to God might lead through rather than away from the full experience of being human. You breathe slowly, you listen deeply, and you drift into understanding that this eternal inspiration represents not just literary influence, but the operation of love itself. How authentic love, once expressed truly, continues to generate itself across time and space, awakening love in others who then become new sources of the same essential energy. The translation projects that attempt to bring his work into endangered languages prove his capacity to breathe new life into linguistic traditions that might otherwise fade. Native speakers working to preserve their own languages find in the challenge of translating Hafez resources for developing their literary traditions, his Persian providing a model for how any language can become a vehicle for expressing the deepest human experiences. A night grows still, and the words of Hafez fade softly into silence. May his eternal verses keep your dreams filled with peace, love, and wonder. Sleep well, and until we meet again in the next forgotten hour, good night.